I was relaxing in my one-bedroom apartment on a quiet Saturday morning when my mother Linda barges through the front door without knocking, dragging 2 large suitcases behind her. My sister Jessica follows, looking embarrassed but determined. "Son, meet the new owner of your apartment," my mother declares with a cruel smile, gesturing toward Jessica. "I'm taking your bedroom for your sister, so throw all your stuff out immediately." My father Robert appears, tossing my leather jacket directly into my face. That's when I smiled calmly and said, "Actually, we need to talk about that." The morning had started so peacefully. I'd been nursing my second cup of coffee while reading the sports section of the newspaper. Still wearing my comfortable gray sweatpants and university t-shirt, the sunlight streamed through the windows of my modest but well-maintained apartment, illuminating the furniture I'd carefully chosen and purchased piece by piece over the past year and a half. My television was quietly playing the morning news in the background, and I had planned to spend the day working on a small carpentry project in my spare bedroom. The sudden crash of my front door flying open shattered that tranquility completely. My mother stormed in like she owned the place, her face set in that familiar expression of righteous determination that had terrorized me throughout my childhood. She wore her best manipulation outfit, the navy blue dress she reserved for church and serious family business, her graying hair pulled back in a severe bun, and her reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck like some badge of authority. Behind her, Jessica struggled with 2 enormous suitcases, clearly packed in haste. My younger sister looked uncomfortable and refused to meet my eyes, her blonde hair disheveled and her usually bright demeanor replaced by something that looked suspiciously like guilt. She kept glancing between our mother and the floor, as if she'd rather be anywhere else in the world. "What the hell is going on?" I asked, setting down my coffee mug and rising from my comfortable leather armchair. The first piece of real furniture I'd ever bought with my own money. "Language, Jimmy," my mother snapped, as if I were still 12 years old instead of 26. "Your sister needs a place to stay, and this apartment has plenty of room for both of you. I've already decided the sleeping arrangements." That's when my father Robert appeared in the doorway, filling the frame with his imposing 6'2" height and broad shoulders. He surveyed my living space with the same calculating look he used when estimating construction jobs at his contracting business. Without warning or explanation, he grabbed my favorite leather jacket from the coat hook near the door and hurled it directly at my head. "Pack up your bedroom, son," he commanded in that gravelly voice that had intimidated me for most of my life. "Jessica needs the space more than you do. You can sleep on the couch or figure something else out." The jacket hit me square in the face, carrying the familiar scent of leather conditioner and the cologne I'd splurged on last Christmas. For a moment, the soft impact transported me back to countless childhood memories of being pushed around, dismissed, and treated like my needs and wants didn't matter in the face of family demands. But something had changed in me over the past few years of living independently. Instead of the automatic compliance they expected, I felt an unusual calm settle over my mind. I caught the jacket smoothly, draped it over my arm, and looked each of them in the eye with a steady gaze that seemed to surprise them. "Actually," I said, keeping my voice level and controlled, "we need to talk about that assumption." 20 minutes later, my family returned from their hallway conference with a completely different strategy. The aggressive entitlement had been replaced by something far more manipulative and emotionally devastating. My mother's eyes were red and watery as she settled onto my couch next to Jessica, who now appeared to be fighting back tears of her own. Robert positioned himself near the window, his arms crossed and his expression grim. "Jimmy," Linda began, her voice trembling with carefully orchestrated emotion, "there's something important about Jessica's situation that we haven't told you yet." Jessica looked up at me with genuine desperation in her eyes. "I'm pregnant, Jimmy. 3 months along." The words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. My sister was only 23 years old, barely out of college, and certainly not in any position to raise a child. I sank into my armchair, trying to process this new information. "Congratulations," I said weakly, unsure of the appropriate response. "That's not all," Robert added grimly. "She was evicted from her apartment 2 weeks ago. She's been sleeping in her car ever since." Linda pulled a crumpled eviction notice from her purse and handed it to me. The official letterhead from Pine Valley Apartments showed a final notice dated 14 days ago, demanding Jessica vacate the premises immediately due to 3 months of unpaid rent totaling $4,200. I lost my job at the marketing firm 6 months ago, Jessica explained through tears. I tried to find something else, but with the pregnancy symptoms and everything, it's been impossible. I fell behind on rent, and the management company wouldn't work with me on a payment plan. My heart broke for her as she described sleeping in her compact car in various parking lots around town, using fast food restaurant, bathrooms to clean up, and surviving on granola bars and gas station coffee. She's carrying our grandchild, Jimmy, my mother said, her voice heavy with implied guilt. Your nephew or niece is going to be born in 5.5 months, and right now they don't even have a roof over their heads. Robert stepped forward, his tone becoming more aggressive. And here you are, living alone in a whole apartment with an extra bedroom, arguing about property deeds and mortgage payments while your pregnant sister sleeps in a car. The emotional manipulation was expertly crafted. They'd positioned me as the heartless brother who cared more about legal technicalities than family welfare. Every decent instinct I possessed was screaming at me to immediately offer Jessica the bedroom, the apartment, whatever she needed. How long have you known about this? I asked. We found out about the eviction 3 days ago, Linda answered. Jessica was too embarrassed to tell us she'd lost her job and fallen behind on rent. She's been trying to handle everything on her own. Jessica wiped her eyes with a tissue. I know this is a huge imposition, Jimmy. I never wanted to burden anyone with my problems. But when Mom and Dad offered to talk to you about temporary help, I was so desperate I agreed to come here. Temporary help, I repeated, looking directly at my mother. How temporary are we talking about? Just until she gets back on her feet, Linda said vaguely. A few months, maybe. Long enough to find a job, save some money, and figure out her living situation before the baby comes. Robert pulled out his wallet and showed me a photograph of Jessica's car, a beat-up Honda Civic with a back seat, piled high with trash bags full of her belongings. Is this really how you want your sister and your future niece or nephew to live? The guilt was overwhelming. Here I was, comfortable in my own apartment, arguing about ownership and boundaries while Jessica faced homelessness during pregnancy. What kind of brother was I? What kind of person would I be if I prioritized property rights over family welfare? But something about their presentation nagged at me. The timing seemed too convenient, too perfectly orchestrated to maximize emotional impact. And Jessica's story contained small inconsistencies that didn't quite align. Jessica, I said gently, when you say you've been sleeping in your car for 2 weeks, where exactly have you been parking? She hesitated for just a moment too long. Different places, Walmart parking lots, mainly. Sometimes behind the 24-hour diner on Route 9. Have you been showering anywhere? Doing laundry? Another pause. The gym where I used to have a membership lets me use the facilities sometimes. And there's a laundromat on 5th Street that has a bathroom. What about meals? Are you eating enough? Getting proper nutrition for the pregnancy? Jimmy, my mother interrupted sharply. What's with the interrogation? Your sister just told you she's homeless and pregnant, and you're grilling her about her daily routine. But I pressed on, my instincts telling me something wasn't adding up. Jessica, have you seen a doctor about the pregnancy? Are you taking prenatal vitamins? Of course she has. Robert answered for her. We're not irresponsible people, Jimmy. Which doctor? I want to make sure you're getting proper care. Jessica looked uncomfortable. Dr. Martinez at the Woman's Clinic on Central Avenue, but I missed my last appointment because I couldn't afford the copay. I made a mental note to verify this information later. And the father of the baby? Where is he in all this? The question caused visible tension among all 3 family members. Jessica's face went pale, and my parents exchanged yet another loaded glance. That's complicated, Jessica said quietly. Complicated how? The father isn't in the picture anymore, Linda answered quickly. They broke up when Jessica told him about the pregnancy. He wanted nothing to do with the responsibility, so he's not contributing any financial support. No, Jessica whispered. He told me I was on my own. The story was heartbreaking, and I felt genuine sympathy for my sister's situation. But the more questions I asked, the more evasive and uncomfortable my family became. Small details didn't align, and their answers seemed rehearsed rather than spontaneous. Look, Jimmy, Robert said, his patience clearly wearing thin. We can discuss all these details later. Right now, your pregnant sister needs a place to sleep tonight. Are you going to help her? Or are you going to let her go back to sleeping in a car? The ultimatum was clear, and the emotional pressure was enormous. They'd painted me into a corner where any hesitation made me look cruel and selfish. But Eid learned enough about manipulation over the years to recognize when I was being backed into a corner. Of course I want to help Jessica, I said carefully. But before we make any arrangements, I need to see the car situation for myself. If she's really been living out of her Honda for 2 weeks, then we need to get her belongings and figure out immediate necessities. Jessica's eyes widened in what looked suspiciously like panic. Oh, that's not necessary. I mean, most of my stuff is just clothes and personal items. Nothing that can't wait. I insist, I said firmly. If my sister is homeless, then I want to understand the full scope of the situation before we make plans. Where's the car parked right now? The silence that followed was telling. My family looked at each other with expressions of growing anxiety, and I knew I was onto something important. The car is at a friend's house, Jessica said quickly, not meeting my eyes. I didn't want to bring it here and make the neighbors think poorly of you. Which friend? I asked. You don't know her, Jessica replied, her voice getting smaller. Try me. I might surprise you. My mother stepped in aggressively. Jimmy, this is ridiculous. Your sister needs help, not an investigation into her living arrangements. Can't you just accept that she's in a difficult situation and offer some support? But I was done being manipulated. No, Mom, I can't just accept it, because if Jessica is really homeless and living in her car, then we need to address that immediately. But if there are other factors I don't know about, then we need to discuss those too. I pulled out my phone. What's the friend's name and address? I'll drive over there right now and help bring Jessica's belongings here. The panic in Jessica's eyes became unmistakable. Jimmy, please, that's not necessary. I can get my stuff later. Jessica, I said gently but firmly, if you've been sleeping in a car for 2 weeks while pregnant, then your belongings situation is an emergency. Clean clothes, toiletries, any medications you might need. These aren't things that can wait. Robert tried a different approach. Son, you're overthinking this. Just focus on the main issue. Your sister needs a place to stay. The main issue, I replied, is that I'm getting conflicting information about Jessica's situation, and I need to understand what's really going on before I commit to any long-term arrangements. I turned back to Jessica with what I hoped was a compassionate expression. I love you, and I want to help you, but I need honest answers. Have you really been sleeping in your car for 2 weeks? The silence stretched on for nearly a full minute. Jessica stared at her hands, tears running down her cheeks, while my parents glared at me with increasing hostility. Finally, Jessica broke. No, she whispered. I haven't been sleeping in my car. Where have you been staying? With our cousin Amanda. She has a spare room at her apartment across town. The revelation hit the room like a bombshell. My parents looked furious that Jessica had broken their agreed-upon story, while I felt a mixture of relief and anger at being deceived. So you haven't been homeless? I said. Not exactly, but Amanda's lease is up at the end of next month, and she's moving back in with her parents. I really don't have anywhere to go after that. And the eviction notice? Jessica pulled the crumpled paper from her purse and handed it to me. That's real. I really did lose my apartment, but Amanda let me stay with her right after it happened. I examined the eviction notice more carefully. The date showed Jessica had been required to vacate 3 weeks ago, not 2, and the address listed was for an apartment complex I knew was relatively expensive. Not the kind of place someone with financial troubles would typically choose. How much was your rent at Pine Valley Apartments? I asked. $1,400 a month. For a 1-bedroom apartment. No, it was a 2-bedroom. I had a roommate, but she moved out in December and stuck me with the full rent. More pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. So you've been paying $2,800 a month for a 2-bedroom apartment on a marketing assistant's salary. Jessica nodded miserably. And when your roommate left, instead of finding a cheaper place or another roommate, you tried to cover the full rent by yourself. I thought I could make it work. I was getting some freelance projects, and I hoped to find a better-paying job quickly. My mother jumped back into the conversation. See, This is exactly why she needs family support. Poor financial decisions don't mean she deserves to be homeless. But she's not homeless, I pointed out. She has housing with Amanda for another month, and she has options beyond moving into my bedroom. Robert's face was getting red with frustration. Jimmy, you're missing the point. Amanda's place is temporary. And after that, Jessica will have nowhere to go. We're trying to plan ahead and make sure our grandchild has stable housing. And that's admirable, I said, but it doesn't require lying to me about Jessica sleeping in her car or barging into my apartment with ultimatums and demands. I walked to my kitchen and filled 3 glasses with water, giving myself a moment to think. The pregnancy was real. I could see the subtle changes in Jessica's face and figure that confirmed she was expecting. The eviction was real too, but the crisis had been dramatically exaggerated to manipulate my emotions and force me into immediate compliance. Here's what I think really happened, I said, returning to the living room. Jessica made some poor financial choices and got evicted from an apartment she couldn't afford. Amanda offered temporary help, but that housing has a definite end date. Instead of exploring realistic options like less expensive apartments, roommates, or family financial assistance, you decided the solution was to take over my apartment. That's not how it happened, Linda protested. Then how did it happen, Mom? Because the story keeps changing every time I ask a question. Jessica looked up at me with fresh tears. Jimmy, I'm scared. I don't know how to be a single mother. I don't have a job, and I don't have much money saved. When Mom and Dad offered to talk to you about letting me stay here, it seemed like the best option for everyone. What exactly did Mom and Dad tell you about this arrangement? They said you'd mentioned you had extra space and wouldn't mind helping family during a crisis. I looked directly at my mother. When exactly did I mention that? Linda's defensive posture became even more pronounced. It was implied, Jimmy, family helps family. I assumed you'd want to do the right thing, so you never actually asked me if Jessica could stay here before today. We're asking now. No, you're not asking. You announced that Jessica was the new owner of my apartment and demanded I move my belongings out of my bedroom immediately. That's not asking for help. That's making demands. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of Jessica's phone buzzing with text messages. She glanced at the screen and her face went pale. Who's texting you? I asked, noticing her obvious distress. Nobody important, she said quickly, shoving the phone into her purse. But Id caught a glimpse of the contact name on her screen. Derek. And judging by Jessica's panicked reaction, Derek wasn't just an unimportant contact. Jessica, who's Derek? The question caused immediate tension among all 3 family members. My parents exchanged their now familiar loaded glance, and Jessica looked like she was about to cry again. Derek is complicated, she said quietly. Is Derek the father of your baby? Yes. The father who supposedly wanted nothing to do with the pregnancy and left you to handle everything on your own. Jessica nodded, but her body language suggested there was much more to the story. And Derek is texting you right now. He texts sometimes. It doesn't mean anything. I was starting to understand that this family crisis was far more complex than anyone was willing to admit. The lies and half-truths were piling up, and I had a growing suspicion that Derek's role in Jessica's situation was much bigger than they were letting on. I think, I said carefully, we need to have a completely honest conversation about Jessica's situation, including Derek's involvement and what's really driving this housing crisis. Robert stood up abruptly. Jimmy, you're turning this into an interrogation when your sister just needs some basic help and support. Dad, I'm trying to understand the real situation so I can provide appropriate help, but I can't make informed decisions based on lies and manipulation. As if on cue, my apartment buzzer rang. Someone was downstairs requesting access to the building. Are we expecting anyone else for this family meeting? I asked. The guilty expressions on my family's faces told me everything I needed to know. That's probably Derek, Jessica said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I texted him earlier that we were here. I stared at my sister in disbelief. You invited the father of your baby to my apartment without telling me. It wasn't my idea, Jessica said quickly. He insisted on coming when I told him where I was. The buzzer rang again, more insistently this time. I walked to my intercom system, but before I could respond, my mother intervened. Jimmy, Derek wants to be part of the solution, Linda said. He's here to help us figure out the housing situation. The Derek, who supposedly abandoned Jessica when he found out about the pregnancy. Robert cleared his throat. The situation with Derek is more complicated than we initially explained. I pressed the intercom button. Who is it? Derek Miller here to see Jessica Thompson and her family. The voice was deep and carried an edge of aggression that immediately put me on guard. And you are Jessica's boyfriend. We need to talk. I looked at my family with growing anger. So Derek didn't abandon Jessica when she got pregnant. He's still her boyfriend, and you invited him to my apartment for this ambush. It's not an ambush, my mother protested. We just thought it would be better if everyone involved could discuss the situation together. I buzzed Derek into the building, but I was furious at the continued deception. Every single thing my family had told me about Jessica's situation contained lies or significant omissions. 3 minutes later, Derek knocked on my apartment door. When I opened it, I was confronted by a large, imposing man who was clearly accustomed to using his physical presence for intimidation. Derek stood about 6 feet 4 inches tall with broad shoulders, heavily muscled arms covered in tattoos, and a shaved head that made his angular features look even more threatening. He wore a black leather jacket over a gray t-shirt and dark jeans, and his eyes immediately began scanning my apartment as if he was evaluating its value. You must be Jimmy, Derek said, extending a hand that gripped mine much harder and longer than necessary. I've heard a lot about you. Wish I could say the same, I replied, extracting my hand from his unnecessarily firm handshake. Derek entered my apartment without waiting for an invitation and immediately positioned himself between me and the rest of my family. His body language was clearly designed to establish dominance and control over the conversation. Nice place you got here, Derek said, his eyes cataloging my furniture, electronics, and decor. Jessica told me you had a good setup, but this is even better than I expected. What exactly brings you here, Derek? Family business, he replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. We need to talk about Jessica and the baby, and how everyone's going to step up and take care of their responsibilities. Jessica looked increasingly uncomfortable as Derek moved closer to her on the couch. Derek, maybe we should discuss this privately first, she suggested. No need for privacy among family, Derek said, placing a possessive hand on Jessica's shoulder that made her flinch slightly. We're all here to figure out the same thing, how to make sure Jessica and my kid have proper housing. Robert seemed relieved to have Derek's support. That's right, we need to focus on the practical solutions, not get bogged down in technical details about property ownership. Derek nodded approvingly. Exactly. Family takes care of family, and right now, Jessica needs a stable place to raise our child. Jimmy here has more space than he needs, so the logical solution is for Jessica to move into the bedroom. And where exactly would I sleep? I asked. Derek shrugged. Couch, air mattress, whatever. Young guy like you doesn't need much space. The important thing is making sure the mother of my child has proper accommodations. The casual dismissal of my needs and comfort was infuriating, but I tried to maintain my composure. Derek, this is my apartment that I own and pay for. Major decisions about housing arrangements require my agreement. Derek's expression hardened. Look, Jimmy, I get that you're attached to your little setup here, but sometimes life requires sacrifices for the good of the family. Your sister is carrying my kid, and that makes her welfare everyone's responsibility. As Derek spoke, another man appeared in my doorway. This newcomer was older, wearing an expensive-looking gray suit and carrying a briefcase that suggested professional authority. Sorry, I'm late, the man said, entering my apartment without invitation. Traffic was brutal downtown. Derek smiled and gestured toward the newcomer. Jimmy, this is Harold Patterson, the family lawyer. He's here to explain your legal obligations regarding Jessica's housing situation. Harold set his briefcase on my coffee table, displacing my property documents, and pulled out several official-looking papers. Mr. Thompson, I'm afraid there are some legal issues regarding your sister's living situation that need immediate attention. What kind of legal issues? I asked, already suspicious of this convenient arrival. Harold adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and spoke in a tone designed to sound authoritative. Under Michigan family abandonment statutes, Siblings have certain legal obligations to provide housing assistance for pregnant relatives who face homelessness. Failure to provide such assistance can result in civil liability and, in extreme cases, criminal charges. The claim sounded dubious to me, but Harold presented it with enough legal jargon and confidence to be intimidating. He spread several documents across my table, pointing to highlighted sections of text. These statutes specifically address situations where one family member has adequate housing, while another faces potential homelessness during pregnancy. The courts take a very dim view of family members who refuse reasonable housing assistance in such circumstances. Derek moved closer to me, using his height advantage to create a physically threatening atmosphere. See, Jimmy, this isn't just about family loyalty anymore. This is about legal requirements that you can't ignore, and the penalties for violating these statutes can be quite severe, Harold added. Monetary damages, court-ordered housing arrangements, and potential criminal liability for child endangerment if the pregnant woman is forced into unsafe living conditions. I felt cornered and intimidated by the combination of legal threats and physical intimidation. Derek continued to position himself between me and the door, while Harold's authoritative legal presentation made me doubt my own rights and knowledge. Additionally, Harold continued, if Miss Thompson were to file a family abandonment lawsuit, the court could potentially order the transfer of property assets to ensure adequate housing for the mother and child. Transfer of property assets, I repeated. In extreme cases, yes. The court has broad discretion to protect pregnant women and children from family abandonment, including ordering the more financially stable family member to provide housing or compensation. Derek stepped even closer to me, close enough that I could smell his cologne and feel his intimidating presence. Jimmy, we're not trying to be unreasonable here. We're just trying to make sure Jessica and my kid have what they need. But if you force us to go the legal route, things could get much more complicated for you. Much more complicated, Harold agreed. Legal fees alone could run into tens of thousands of dollars, and that's before we consider potential damage awards and court-ordered housing arrangements. Jessica looked genuinely distressed by the escalating tension. Derek, maybe we should give Jimmy some time to think about this, she suggested weakly. Time to think about what? Derek snapped. His pregnant sister needs housing, and he has housing. This isn't complicated. Derek moved to position himself directly in front of me, his muscular frame blocking my path to the door. Jimmy, I'm trying to be reasonable here, but I need to know that my girlfriend and my kid are going to be taken care of. If you can't step up and do the right thing as her brother, then maybe I need to take a more active role in protecting their interests. The threat was clear, and Derek's physical positioning left no doubt that he was willing to use intimidation to get what he wanted. I felt trapped in my own apartment, surrounded by people who were using legal manipulation and veiled threats to force my compliance. What exactly are you saying, Derek? I'm saying that Jessica's welfare is my top priority, and I'll do whatever it takes to make sure she has proper housing during her pregnancy. I hope we can work this out as family. But if not, well, explore other options. Harold nodded gravely. The legal system provides several mechanisms for protecting pregnant women from family abandonment. We would prefer to resolve this amicably, but we're prepared to pursue all available remedies if necessary. As Derek leaned closer to emphasize his point, his jacket fell open slightly, and I caught a glimpse of what looked suspiciously like a weapon holstered under his arm. The sight sent a chill through me and made the threat level of this encounter crystal clear. So what's it going to be, Jimmy? Derek asked, his face inches from mine. Are you going to do the right thing for your sister? Or do we need to find other ways to resolve this situation? After Derek and Harold left with promises to return the next day for my final decision, I waited exactly 30 minutes before beginning my investigation. Something about the entire encounter felt orchestrated and wrong, and I was determined to find out what was really happening. I started by researching Harold Patterson online. A simple Google search revealed that while there was indeed a lawyer named Harold Patterson practicing in Michigan, his specialty was tax law, and his office was located over 200 miles away in Detroit. More importantly, the man who had been in my apartment looked nothing like the professional headshot on the legitimate Harold Patterson's law firm website. Next, I searched for information about Michigan family abandonment statutes. After reading through multiple legal databases and state law websites, I confirmed what I'd suspected. No such laws existed that could force a sibling to provide housing or face criminal charges. The entire legal threat had been completely fabricated. But my most disturbing discoveries came when I researched Derek Miller. A simple Facebook search revealed Derek's profile, which was filled with concerning posts and photographs that painted a very different picture of his character. In recent weeks, Head posted photos of himself outside my apartment building, with captions like, "Checking out the new place and upgrade time." The posts were dated several days before today's confrontation, which meant Derek had been planning this takeover for much longer than anyone had admitted. Digging deeper into Derek's social media presence, I found connections to several women who had posted warnings about him in local Facebook groups. These women described Derek as manipulative, controlling, and financially exploitative. One woman, Sarah, had posted a detailed warning just 2 months earlier, describing how Derek had convinced her to get housing and money from her family under false pretenses, then used her apartment for his own purposes while maintaining relationships with multiple other women. Another woman, Crystal, had posted about Derek's pattern of targeting women with family connections he could exploit for housing and financial support. She described how Head convinced her to ask her parents for money to cover emergency expenses that never actually existed, then disappeared with the cash. The more I researched, the clearer Derek's pattern became. He identified women with family resources, particularly housing or financial assets, then established relationships specifically to exploit those connections. The pregnancy with Jessica fit perfectly into this pattern. It created urgency, emotional manipulation opportunities, and legal-sounding justifications for his demands. I also found Derek's criminal background through public court records. He had arrests for domestic violence dating back 5 years, involving 3 different women. Had been charged with fraud in 2 separate cases involving rental scams where Head convinced people to pay deposits for apartments he didn't own. Most recently, he had outstanding warrants in Ohio and Pennsylvania for similar fraud schemes. But the most chilling discovery was Derek's arrest record for intimidation and assault. The police reports described his pattern of using physical presence and implied threats to coerce compliance from victims. In one case, Head convinced a woman's brother to sign over his car title under threats of violence if the brother didn't take care of family responsibilities. Armed with this information, I realized that Jessica was likely another victim of Derek's manipulation rather than a willing participant in the scheme. The timeline of their relationship coincided with her job loss and financial troubles, which suggested Derek had targeted her during a vulnerable period. I decided to call Amanda, my cousin who was housing Jessica, to verify parts of the story and potentially warn her about Derek's background. "Jimmy, I'm so glad you called," Amanda said immediately. "I've been worried about Jessica for weeks. There's something really wrong with her situation." "What do you mean?" "This Derek guy is bad news. He's been controlling every aspect of Jessica's life since she moved in here. He monitors her phone calls, tells her who she can and can't talk to, and he's been pressuring her to get money and housing from your family." Amanda explained that Derek had been living at her apartment unofficially for the past 2 weeks, despite not being on the lease or contributing to expenses. Head convinced Jessica that approaching her family for housing was the smart financial move and had coached her on what to say to maximize emotional impact. "Jessica didn't want to involve your parents initially," Amanda continued. "She was embarrassed about the eviction and wanted to handle things independently. But Derek kept pressuring her, saying that family money was easier than getting a job and that she could use the pregnancy to guilt people into helping." The picture was becoming clearer. Derek had identified Jessica's family as a resource to be exploited and had manipulated her into being his access point. The lies about sleeping in her car, the exaggerated timeline, and the dramatic presentation had all been Derek's ideas designed to maximize emotional manipulation. "Amanda, has Derek ever threatened Jessica or been violent toward her?" "Not that I've witnessed directly, but Jessica has become increasingly anxious and jumpy since he's been around. She seems scared to disagree with him or make decisions without his approval. And there have been a couple of times when I heard them arguing, and Jessica was crying. I realized that Jessica was likely experiencing domestic abuse and coercion, which explained her compliance with Derek's scheme even when she seemed uncomfortable with the deception." "One more thing, Jimmy," Amanda added. "Derek has been bragging to people about his plan to take over your apartment. has been telling people he's found a way to get free housing by manipulating Jessica's family, and has been showing off photos of your place, like it already belongs to him. This confirmed my suspicions that Derek had been planning this takeover for weeks, and had specifically targeted my family's assets through his relationship with Jessica. I spent the rest of the evening documenting everything Eid learned and developing a plan to expose Derek's manipulation while protecting Jessica from his retaliation. I also researched domestic violence resources and legal options for dealing with Derek's criminal background and outstanding warrants. The most important realization was that this wasn't just about protecting my apartment. It was about protecting my sister from an abusive, manipulative criminal who was using her pregnancy to exploit our entire family. Derek's pattern of targeting vulnerable women and their family resources made him a genuine threat to Jessica's safety and well-being. I decided to contact the police department the next morning to report Derek's outstanding warrants and discuss his pattern of fraud and intimidation. I also planned to arrange a meeting with Jessica away from Derek's influence to show her the evidence of his criminal background and offer her genuine support for escaping the relationship safely. But first, I needed to document Derek's threats and harassment from today's encounter. I made detailed notes about his intimidation tactics, the fake lawyers' fraudulent legal claims, and Derek's implied threats of violence. This documentation would be crucial for any legal action and for protecting both Jessica and myself from Derek's escalating manipulation. The situation was far more serious than a simple family housing dispute. Derek was a career criminal who specialized in exploiting families through manipulated relationships, and had identified my apartment and my family's assets as his next target. Stopping him would require careful planning and professional help, but I was determined to protect Jessica and expose Derek's scheme before he could cause further harm. The next morning, I contacted Detective Lisa Rodriguez at the local police department to discuss Derek's outstanding warrants and criminal background. After reviewing the evidence Eid gathered, she confirmed that Derek was wanted in multiple jurisdictions and agreed to assist with his arrest. Mr. Thompson, based on the warrants and the pattern of behavior you've described, Derek Miller poses a genuine threat to your sister's safety. Detective Rodriguez explained, we can coordinate his arrest, but we'll need to ensure Jessica's safety and get her cooperation as a potential witness. We developed a plan to arrange a family meeting at my apartment where Derek would be present, allowing the police to execute the arrest warrants while gathering evidence of his fraud and intimidation schemes. Detective Rodriguez would position officers nearby to intervene when Derek inevitably became aggressive. I also called my cousin Amanda and Jessica's best friend Rachel, asking them to attend the meeting as supportive witnesses who genuinely cared about Jessica's well-being. Both women agreed to participate and help Jessica understand the reality of Derek's manipulation. Jimmy, I'm so relieved you're doing something, Rachel said. Jessica used to be so independent and confident, but she's completely changed since Derek came into her life. I've been worried about her for months. That afternoon, I called my parents and Jessica to arrange the meeting, presenting it as my final decision about the housing arrangement. I could hear Derek coaching Jessica in the background during our phone conversation, telling her what questions to ask and what responses to give. Tomorrow at 2 p.m., I told Jessica, everyone should come so we can finalize the arrangements and discuss expectations. When Derek got on the phone, his tone was triumphant and possessive. Smart choice, Jimmy. I knew you'd see reason once you understood the legal situation. Well, be there to work out the details of Jessica moving in. Actually, Derek, I've prepared a comprehensive response to yesterday's legal concerns. I think you'll find it very interesting. The confidence in Derek's voice faltered slightly. What kind of response? You'll see tomorrow. Just make sure Harold comes too. I have some questions about those Michigan statutes he mentioned. The next day, Derek and Jessica arrived at my apartment exactly on time, with Derek carrying himself with the swagger of someone who believed he'd successfully manipulated the situation. Jessica looked exhausted and anxious, and she kept glancing at Derek as if seeking permission before speaking. Where's Harold? I asked. Derek looked uncomfortable. He had another case today, but we can handle the details ourselves. That's unfortunate. I had some very specific legal questions for him. Amanda and Rachel arrived a few minutes later, and Derek's demeanor immediately became more aggressive when he realized other people would be witnessing the conversation. Who are they? Derek demanded. Family and friends who care about Jessica's well-being, I replied calmly. My parents arrived last, looking nervous and uncertain. They'd clearly expected this to be a simple arrangement where I would capitulate to their demands, and the presence of additional witnesses made them uncomfortable. Jimmy, my mother said, I thought this was going to be a family discussion. It is a family discussion, Mom. Amanda is family, and Rachel is Jessica's closest friend. Everyone here cares about what's best for Jessica and the baby. Derek positioned himself between Jessica and the other women, a move that didn't go unnoticed by Amanda and Rachel. His body language was clearly designed to control Jessica's interactions and responses. Let's cut to the chase, Derek said aggressively. Jimmy agreed to let Jessica move into the bedroom, so we just need to work out the logistics. Actually, Derek, I didn't agree to anything. I said I had a comprehensive response to your legal concerns, and I think you'll find it very enlightening. I walked to my desk and pulled out a thick folder containing all my research from the previous day. Let's start with your legal expert, Harold Patterson. I showed Derek a printout of the real Harold Patterson's law firm website, including professional photos that clearly showed a different person than the man who had been in my apartment. This is the real Harold Patterson, tax attorney from Detroit. The man you brought here yesterday was an imposter presenting fraudulent legal claims. Derek's confident expression began to crack around the edges. That doesn't change the legal requirements about family housing obligations. Actually, it does. Because there are no such legal requirements. I pulled out copies of Michigan state statutes and legal research. I spent several hours yesterday researching every family law statute in Michigan, and not one of them requires siblings to provide housing or face criminal charges. Jessica looked confused and concerned. Derek, you said the legal issues were real. They are real, Derek insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. Then explain this, I said, pulling out my phone and showing Derek's social media posts. These are photos you posted on Facebook 5 days ago, showing you outside my apartment building with captions about checking out the new place and upgrade time. You were planning this takeover before Jessica even contacted our family. The room went silent as everyone absorbed the implications. Derek had been planning to take over my apartment long before the supposed family crisis, which meant the entire emergency housing story was premeditated fraud. Amanda stepped forward. Jessica, Derek has been living at my apartment for 2 weeks without being on the lease, and he's been pressuring you to approach your family for money and housing ever since he moved in, Rachel added. Jessica, you need to know that several women in town have posted warnings about Derek online. He has a pattern of manipulating women to get housing and money from their families. Derek's calm facade completely disappeared. You don't know what you're talking about, he snarled at Rachel. This is family business that doesn't concern you. Jessica's safety concerns all of us. Rachel replied firmly. I pulled out the most damaging evidence. Derek's criminal background and outstanding warrants. Derek, you have arrests for domestic violence involving 3 different women. You have fraud charges in 2 states involving rental scams, and you currently have outstanding warrants in Ohio and Pennsylvania. Derek's face went white, then flushed red with rage. You have no right to investigate my background, he shouted. I have every right to research the criminal history of someone who's threatening me in my own home, I replied. Jessica looked horrified as she processed this information. Derek, is this true? Do you really have arrests for domestic violence? Those women were lying, Derek said desperately. They were trying to get back at me for ending relationships. 3 different women in 3 different cities, all lying about the same thing, Amanda asked skeptically. Derek realized his manipulation was unraveling and became increasingly agitated. He moved toward me aggressively, his hands clenched into fists. You have no idea what you're messing with, Jimmy, he threatened. I'm not going to let you ruin this for Jessica and my kid. Actually, Derek, you're the one who's been ruining things for Jessica. You've been using her pregnancy to manipulate my family while exploiting her financial desperation. Derek stepped closer to me, his face twisted with rage. Shut your mouth before I shut it for you. Are you threatening me, Derek? I'm promising you that if you don't stop interfering with my family, there will be consequences. At that moment, Derek reached inside his jacket, and I was certain he was going for a weapon, but instead of a gun, 3 police officers burst through my apartment door, with Detective Rodriguez leading the way. Derek Miller, You're under arrest on outstanding warrants from Ohio and Pennsylvania, Detective Rodriguez announced. Derek spun around in shock as the officers surrounded him. This is harassment. I didn't do anything wrong. You have the right to remain silent, one officer said as they moved to handcuff Derek. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Derek struggled against the handcuffs, shouting threats at everyone in the room. This isn't over. Jessica, don't let them turn you against me. Remember who's been taking care of you. But Jessica was crying with what looked like relief rather than distress. I'm so sorry, Jimmy, she whispered. I didn't know about his criminal background. I thought he really loved me. As the police led Derek away in handcuffs, he continued shouting threats and accusations. You have no idea what you've done, Jimmy. When I get out, I'm going to remember this. Detective Rodriguez stayed behind to take statements from everyone present and collect evidence of Derek's fraud and intimidation schemes. Miss Thompson, we'll need your cooperation as a witness to Derek's manipulation and any threats or controlling behavior you experienced. Will he be able to get out of jail and come after me? Jessica asked fearfully. With multiple outstanding warrants and the evidence of ongoing criminal activity, Derek will likely remain in custody for quite some time, Detective Rodriguez assured her, and we can help you obtain a restraining order for additional protection. The relief in the room was palpable as everyone realized the threat was over and Jessica was safe from Derek's manipulation. In the days following Derek's arrest, the truth about Jessica's situation became much clearer. Without Derek's manipulation and control, she was finally able to speak honestly about what had been happening in her life. Jimmy, I'm so ashamed of how I let myself get used, Jessica said during a private conversation at my apartment 3 days later. Derek convinced me that approaching the family for housing was smart financial planning, not manipulation. He made everything seem reasonable when I was scared and desperate. She explained how Derek had gradually isolated her from friends and family members who might have questioned his influence. Had convinced her that people who criticized him were jealous or didn't understand their relationship. The pregnancy had made her feel even more vulnerable and dependent on his support. When I lost my job and got evicted, Derek appeared like a knight in shining armor, offering help and solutions. Jessica continued, but looking back, I realize he orchestrated a lot of the financial pressure that made me desperate in the first place. With Derek's arrest, Jessica was finally free to make decisions about her pregnancy and future without his coercive influence. She chose to move back to Amanda's apartment temporarily while working with a counselor who specialized in domestic abuse recovery. My parents were devastated when they understood how thoroughly Derek had manipulated the entire family. Jimmy, we owe you a sincere apology, my father said during a family meeting the following week. We got caught up in Derek's emergency narrative and forgot to respect your boundaries and independence. Linda was particularly emotional as she processed how Derek had exploited their desperation to help Jessica. I was so worried about the baby and Jessica's safety that I didn't think critically about the solutions being presented. I just wanted to fix the crisis as quickly as possible. Through family counseling sessions, we learned about the manipulation tactics Derek had used and how families can protect themselves from similar exploitation in the future. The counselor helped us understand that Derek had specifically targeted our family dynamics and financial resources through his relationship with Jessica. Predators like Derek are skilled at identifying family vulnerabilities and exploiting them through manufactured crises, our counselor explained. They create urgency and emotional pressure that makes families bypass normal decision-making processes. Jessica worked with victim services to obtain a restraining order against Derek, who was ultimately convicted on multiple fraud charges and sentenced to 18 months in prison. His arrest led to additional victims coming forward with similar stories of manipulation and exploitation. Over the following months, Jessica made remarkable progress in rebuilding her independence and confidence. She found a part-time job that accommodated her pregnancy schedule, enrolled in prenatal classes, and developed a realistic budget for single motherhood. I realized that Derek's version of help always came with strings attached and made me more dependent rather than more capable. Jessica reflected. Real help builds your independence and supports your growth. With professional counseling support, Jessica made an informed decision to place the baby for adoption with a loving couple who had struggled with infertility for years. I'm not ready to be a parent, and this baby deserves parents who are prepared to provide everything a child needs," she explained. The adoption process was handled through a reputable agency with full legal support and counseling for all parties involved. Jessica maintained contact with the adoptive parents and felt confident that her child would have the stable, loving home she wanted to provide, but wasn't equipped to create, as a 23-year-old recovering from financial and emotional trauma. My parents and I rebuilt our relationship based on mutual respect and healthy boundaries. They came to understand and appreciate the life I'd built for myself, while I learned to have compassion for their struggles without enabling manipulation. "Jimmy, we're proud of how you handled that crisis," Robert said during one of our monthly family dinners. "You protected yourself and Jessica while still providing genuine help when it was needed." Linda added, "We learned that loving someone doesn't mean sacrificing your own well-being or enabling their poor choices. Sometimes real help requires tough love and professional intervention." 6 months later, Jessica had her own apartment near Amanda, a stable job in customer service, and was attending college part-time to finish her degree in communications. The baby was thriving with the adoptive parents, who sent regular photos and updates to Jessica as agreed upon in the adoption plan. "I finally feel like myself again," Jessica told me during one of our weekly coffee dates. "Derek almost convinced me that I was helpless and needed someone else to make decisions for me. Now I know I'm capable of handling my own life." Our family gatherings became monthly dinner parties at my apartment, where everyone respected boundaries while maintaining warm, supportive relationships. The crisis with Derek had taught us all valuable lessons about manipulation, family dynamics, and the difference between genuine help and enabling dysfunction. I kept my apartment exactly as I wanted it, but it also became a place where family members felt welcome and supported. Jessica often brought dessert for our dinners. My parents contributed by cooking their famous pot roast, and Amanda and Rachel became regular attendees who added laughter and perspective to our conversations. The experience taught me that protecting your boundaries doesn't make you selfish. It makes you strong enough to provide genuine help when people really need it. Derek's manipulation had tried to convince our family that love required sacrifice and compliance, but we learned that real love respects independence and supports growth. As I reflect on that terrifying week when my family barged into my apartment with demands and ultimatums, I'm grateful for the strength I found to stand up for myself and investigate the real situation. If Eid capitulated to the emotional manipulation, Derek would have succeeded in exploiting our entire family, while Jessica remained trapped in an abusive relationship. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for family members is refuse to enable their destructive choices while offering genuine support for healthy alternatives. Jessica needed protection from Derek's manipulation, not accommodation for his schemes. My parents needed education about manipulation tactics, not validation for their enabling behavior. Today, our family is stronger and healthier than ever before. We communicate openly, respect each other's boundaries, and provide support that builds independence rather than creating dependency. Jessica is thriving as a confident, capable young woman who made difficult but responsible choices about her future. The baby she placed for adoption has loving parents who send regular updates showing a happy, healthy child growing up in a stable home. The apartment that Derek tried to steal from me remains my sanctuary and gathering place for a family that now understands the value of mutual respect and healthy boundaries. Every month when we gather for dinner, I'm reminded that protecting what you've worked for isn't selfish. It's the foundation that allows you to genuinely help others when they truly need support. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who tried to manipulate you during a crisis? How did you balance protecting yourself while still offering genuine help to people you love? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Please like this story if it resonated with you. Subscribe for more stories about family dynamics and personal growth, and share it with anyone who might benefit from understanding manipulation tactics and healthy boundary setting. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable destructive behavior while offering genuine support for positive change.